Hi there. For this tutorial, I thought I would just go into some detail on modifiers. So in this case, I thought I would start with the subdivision surface modifier. So we've got a basic cube here. It's just 8 vertices as you would expect. And we'll go into the modifiers, which is this little spanner symbol, wrench symbol, and we'll click add modifier and subdivision surface. I'm going to just remove that now and show you that there's another quick shortcut to get to that. And that is to hold down Control and press 2, and now you can see I've got a level 2 subdivision. If I delete that again, Control 1 will give me a level 1 subdivision. So what is it that subdivision is doing? If I go into edit mode, you can see our original cube is still there, and you can see if I go into forward view and then I press 5 on the numpad, that will actually put me into orthographic view where parallax doesn't show up in the image. So in other words, things are the same size no matter how far away from the camera they are, as you can see from here. So that allows us to ignore the effects of 3D when we're looking at a shape. So if we have a look, what we've actually done by adding a level 1, viewport level 1, and I'll talk about the other number in a moment, by adding a viewport level 1 subdivision, we've added additional vertices. If I turn this on, we can now see where those vertices are. So this is just shows the shape even in edit mode as it is after adding this modifier. So we originally had 8, and you can see we've got additional vertices between each one. So just looking at this front face here, we've got 8 vertices just on this front face, which of course originally only had 4. So for all intents and purposes, it's added vertices between each one, as well as adding another vertex in the center here. I show the original shape again, but it's done more than that, because what it's also done is it's decided where positionally those vertices should be. So if it just added additional vertices, and we can show what that would look like, I can go to simple. It has the default mode of Catmull-Clark. If I go to simple, we get our cube back. I'll go to wireframe now so it's easy to see what's going on. So you can't currently see those additional vertices, but they are there. And the way I can see it very easily is if I click in here and just apply that subdivision surface, and then go into edit mode, now you can see that that's exactly what it did. For each face, it added a vertex between the 2 points, midway between the 2 existing vertices, and between there, and then it added an additional one in the center here, midway between all 4 of the vertices, and then joined them all together with lines. So we're in vertex mode at the moment, obviously. So we've now got 26 vertices. And a quick way to see how many vertices we've got in edit mode is down here. You can see there they are. And we can see edges and faces there. So I'm going to Control Z just to unapply that modifier, and we'll go back to Catmull-Clark. And you can see it's gone back down to 8 vertices. When I come out of edit mode, you notice it goes up to 26. When we are in edit mode, it's showing the real vertices. When we come out of edit mode, it's showing the sum of the original vertices plus our subdivision surface. So another way of thinking of this is that it's smoothing the shape out when you have Catmull-Clark. It doesn't do any smoothing, it just adds additional vertices when you use simple, which is sometimes useful. But under Catmull-Clark, it tries to smooth it out. So those additional vertices are put in a position as if it was an arc between those 2 points. So whatever the shape is, it will be smoothed to some degree by adding extra vertices. So we've got viewport levels and render levels. It's not uncommon for you to use quite a lot of subdivisions or to have quite a few vertices to begin with and then add even more using your subdivision modifier. That can start to cause problems for your computer to keep up with the number of vertices, particularly when you're making modifications. So what you can do is have less vertices being displayed when you're in the viewport compared to the number it would actually render with. So if I add a lamp into this scene, just make sure it's bright enough. We'll set the background to black, and I'll add a simple material which will make a little bit shiny. And at the moment that's not really showing much in specular terms because it's such a low poly object. But if I go to rendered view now, you can see that's a higher resolution object. So here it is just in the viewport. I'm just going to move the camera, and now we give it a render, and we can see that's a higher resolution object. So let's go up to a significantly higher number of subdivisions. So you can still just about make them out, and I've set viewport and render to the same for the moment. So if we now go to rendered view, Now you can see we're starting to get a little bit of specular. Now if I wanted this to be completely smooth, or appear to be completely smooth, I could of course carry on putting more levels of subdivision on, except it won't let me go above 6. I could apply this subdivision surface, or if I take this down to say 3, I can add another subdivision surface and put that up to 3. So that's now 6, but now I can of course go even higher. So that's taking the object created by this first subdivision surface and subdividing it again. So that's adding another 6. So it's 3 subdivisions followed by 6. And now you can see we're starting to get a much more convincing smooth shape. However, if we look down here, we are now already up to 1.5 million vertices, which is an awful lot. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do that unless you had to. Kill that second subdivision surface, we're straight down to 386. So we're back to our 3 subdivisions, and that's still a reasonable number of faces, but if we wanted to keep it low, we wouldn't want to add too many more subdivisions to that. However, we can right click and we can say shade smooth. The default is shade flat. Now, for the most part, that works. We have some artifacts here which we may or may not have when we render. So if we render now, yeah, we have. So you can address some of that by adjusting some of the settings for your light. So if I make this a much bigger angle, for example, you'll notice those sharp jagged lines largely disappear. So if I render that now, it looks okay. There's only so much that can be done using simulated geometry, as it were. So you can just about make out those lines are still there. And if you look at the edge of this object, we still have that relatively low poly look. So you will need to find a sweet spot between minimizing the amount of geometry, which you may or may not need to do depending on the scene you're creating, and creating the look that you're trying to achieve. So in this case, I would want to go up at least 1 level, and already you can't really see those triangles, those artifacts. So I can start to make the light quite a bit sharper now. In fact, I've come down quite a long way, and I've had to come down almost to a pinpoint light. You can see it's just a little dot there now, and we're only just starting to get some artifacts. The size of the light, in the case of the sun lamp, the size affects whether you're seeing sun behind clouds, a very blurry sun compared to a very clear sky, and you're getting very sharp shadows. So if it's a space scene, you'll want a relatively small angle, but if it's somewhere indoors or in a cloudy location, then you would want a bigger angle. So in this case, just going up to sort of 20 with the number of subdivisions I've now got on here gives us a reasonable effect without getting too many visible artifacts, even with only 1 light source. And having more light sources, by the way, will also hide some of those artifacts. And the edge of what was a cube is now looking fine. And one of the good things, of course, is that cube is still there. There it is. So our original shape is still there. I could still grab one of those vertices and pull it around, and our spherical object starts to be distorted. If we look down at advanced, and I come back down to 2 subdivisions, in fact we'll just go for 1 subdivision for the viewport for the moment, you'll notice the shape seems to change in size when I click that use limit surface. I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to use limit surface. Possibly there may be an impact on compute time. However, the idea of it, as you can see from the tooltip, it's as it were making many calculations in order to get the best, most optimal position for the new vertices to give you the closest match to the curve. It's not just taking the simple halfway point, as it were. So it gives you a better approximation of a smooth surface, or in the case of a cube with a subdivision surface added, the best approximation to a sphere with the number of subdivisions you've added. And this obviously is to do with how accurately it works out those subdivisions. I imagine it's doing something a bit like calculus on trying to work out where these points are. The rest of this is to do with how it deals with UV maps. So if I go to my cube, I'm just going to temporarily remove the subdivision surface. In edit mode, I'm going to press U, and I'm going to say cube projection for UV mapping. I'm then going to my material, and under base color, I'm going to say image texture, and we'll select an image of a flower. And there it is. It's correctly mapped because Blender knew this was a cube. So in rendered view, it looks fine. Obviously we've only got one light source in the scene at the moment. Now we'll go and add a subdivision modifier. And you can see it's still doing a reasonable job. It's still essentially cube mapped. And if I increase the subdivisions, we'll go up to the maximum. You can see it's still there. You can see the join, but you can also see the way that it's mapped those together. For a simple shape like this, and with such a simple UV map, you won't really see very much difference between these different options. But a more complex shape with a more complex UV map, you may well find that some of these other options may help you in getting the map to work better with your object. Creases are to do with how the shape looks. So if I go to my cube and I select these two vertices, Control E, and we'll just say edge crease. You can see there's a shortcut to it, which is Shift E. And you can see the colors changing, but also you can see there's an effect on our shapes. So I'll leave it up at maximum. So you can see there is an effect from that crease, which is now a pinkish purple line. And essentially it's making the subdivision surface modifier respect the fact that this should be a creased or sharp edge. If I selected two more, and I could even select the whole lot. So all I've done there is added a maximum crease all around that one face. So it still produces a circle, or an approximation of a circle, but it's decided that face is flat because this is creased here. If I turn this off, it ignores that and just does what it wants to do. So that's one incarnation of the subdivision surface. There's a way to do some additional effects as well. I'm going to remove that object and just put a new cube back. And I'm going to add another modifier, but this isn't really about that modifier. This is just going to help me explain something. And it's going to be the displace modifier. So this basically takes an input, which is a texture, and changes the shape of the position of the vertices on an object based on that texture. So we can use an image, but I'm just going to use a procedural texture. So I've just clicked that little button to create a new texture. And then if I click these little switches, that takes me into the texture options. And rather than image, I'm just going to use clouds, which is one of the most common. I'm going to say hard, and I'm going to turn the size up a bit. Now you can see my shape over here is distorting, but I can't really see any impact of these clouds that I can recognize over in my shape. And that's simply because there's not enough vertices to see it. So I'm going to add a subdivision surface. At the moment, that's below that modifier, that displace modifier. So it's not helping us to see what's going on. Even if I put it all the way up to 6, it's just made a smooth, slightly distorted ball. If I lift it up here, suddenly now we can start to see what that displace modifier is really doing. So I'll turn the strength down a little bit so it's not quite so extreme, and now we can see what effect that's having. And if I go back to the texture modifier, and if I play with the size, you can now see how that is mapping into that shape. So we'll have a relatively small size. We'll go back to our displace modifier and we'll turn the strength up just a little. And already you can see we're getting an effect. It's an interesting effect, but unless we wanted this sort of low poly look, it's not ideal. We can, of course, go to shade smooth, and that makes a difference. But we're already up to 24,000 vertices. We'll add another modifier, and we could just leave that on the surface like that. So that's just level 1 for the viewport at the moment. And that might be fine for what we're trying to achieve. I could put it up here. So that's now added an additional subdivision, and you can see we're getting finer detail, but we're getting artifacts as well because the shading is struggling. The smooth shading is still struggling to give us what we need. But what if we want to add textures but dynamically manage how the shape appears? So here we're actually changing geometry, but there's a way to do this that is more efficient. So I'm going to remove those two modifiers and we'll just go with subdivision of 3, and we've still got smooth shading on. So at this point I'm going to just quickly open up the shader editor and we'll create a new material, and there's our default material. It's just a plain material at the moment. We'll go to rendered view and I'm going to add the texture, which is an image texture, and I'm going to use a rock and stone texture. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit in how I do this, but you'll see why shortly. So here's relatively fine detail rock texture, and I'll just put that into there. And it's just giving me the default generated UV map. So therefore we have got lines in it, but I'm not too worried about that at the moment. So what if I wanted some surface texture as well? Well, I can add, if I put that back into the base color for a moment, and I'll add, and this will connect to the subdivision surface in a moment. I'm going to add converter, which is a color ramp, drop that in there. It'll go black and white. And now narrow this in to a point where I'm selecting for the more extreme elements of the texture. I don't have to do this, but it just allows me to have a little bit more control. I could have it really tight like that, but that would just be too much. I want a little bit of grayscale in there. So without it, there's the full picture, and with it, that's what we're getting. So I'm going to take that out of there, and I'm going to add under vector a bump node. So we'll take the color into height on the bump node, and then take the output of the bump node into the normal input. And you can see we've now got a texture on here, and that's quite a fine texture. That's a render time effect. Obviously it's limited by the resolution of the image, and the image isn't that fine a resolution. So we can plug the color back into there, and there you go. So that's just a very quick way to achieve a result. However, what we would also like is a finer level of detail on our object. Now we can put material straight into displacement. What I'm going to do, because this isn't the highest resolution source image, so I'm going to add a texture which is a Voronoi texture. So we'll put that into displacement. I'll take bump off for now and set it to smooth F1, and then we can change the scale. So I'm putting that up quite a long way. So that is now a very high level of detail. But when we render, all of that is rendered equally. So it has to render that level of detail, whether it's close to the camera and we can see it, or far from the camera and we can't. So I'm just putting everything back the way it was. We've obviously still got some artifacts there from the relatively low resolution that we're using. Just turned it up a little bit. So that Voronoi texture has just added that fine texture into there. If I take it off, you can see it disappears. And then we can add usually a math node set to multiply, and then we can just turn the depth of that texture down. See, that's naught, and you normally don't need very much. Even at 0.025, that's quite significant enough. And the strength on this texture probably doesn't need to be quite as high either. Now the reason I wanted to show that is because, as I said, Blender is having to calculate all of these render time effects. We quickly render. I mean, it's not taking very long at the moment, but it's still having to do more work than it otherwise might. There's a feature available with the subdivision surface under experimental mode. So if we come up to here and change from supported to experimental, then go back to our modifiers, you'll notice we've got a new option, which is adaptive render time subdivision. So if I turn that on, what this will now do is allow us to set how many subdivisions we have based on how visible it is in the viewport. So we've got a basic viewport level of 4 subdivisions there, but we have this dicing scale, and you can see it says here final scale render 1 pixel for a viewport of 8 pixels. So it's adding additional subdivisions. So if I turn this down, you have to be a bit careful with this, we're effectively increasing the level of detail that we can see. If I go to 0.5, so it's hard to see in such a simple example, but essentially that has allowed us to have more detail in parts of the scene that are closer to the camera. But as I say, that's obviously something that's still in work at the moment, and therefore it could change, it could crash, that kind of thing, because it's under the experimental options in here. So you'll only see those options available if you change to experimental mode. In supported mode, you don't get that. So just to show what people always do when they're showing the subdivision surface, I'm going to add under mesh a Suzanne head, put her there. We'll give her the same material, and then we'll just add the subdivision surface. And of course, what we actually appear to get is more detail. We have more vertices, but it's implied detail, it's calculated detail, procedurally generated. It isn't detail that's in the original file. And of course, one of the main things about modifiers is that they're non-destructive. My original monkey head with the low number of vertices, 2000, is still there, allowing me to build up my modifiers or to do all sorts of things to it. And of course, it's much easier to modify a lower poly shape because you've got a lot less vertices to move around than it is to modify a high poly shape, unless you created the high poly shape with the subdivision surface. One of the little things to watch out for with the subdivision surface, one last little thing, is if you start to get artifacts. So let's change this to a nice smooth material, particularly if it's partly metallic, and we'll set it to shade smooth. That looks fine at the moment, but I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to do that by changing the orientation of the normals. So I've just flipped those, and you can see we've got something really odd going on here, and it's very common as you're building objects for normals to end up facing the wrong way, and then you're wondering why your shape doesn't look quite right, particularly if you use mirror modifiers and things like that. Of course, Blender now has a very quick way to check your normals without having to show each of them and look at hundreds of little lines, by just selecting face orientation. And now you can see straight away there's a little red bit on his nose, which is those normals. The little red that we can see up here is that there's a gap between his eye and his eye socket, so we're seeing inside the shape. And obviously what we can do is we can just select those normals and then just do exactly what I did before under mesh, normals. You can try and recalculate outside if it's a large area. If you've got more than just the flipped vertices selected, then you can try and recalculate outside. Won't always work. Or you can just flip if you've just got a specific area that's a problem. So subdivision surface will often show up problems with the geometry. So you want to stick with as clean a geometry as you can. And that's another reason for keeping your base geometry simple in order to make it easier to correct problems like that. If I was to unflip those normals again and then apply that subdivision surface, it's still doable of course, but now you can see we've got a lot more vertices that need to be corrected. And that's potentially when I might try and use recalculate outside. And in the case of Suzanne, that worked fine, but won't always. We've also ended up with a slight problem because of course the calculation for the subdivision surface wasn't working properly when I applied it, so I've ended up with a slightly strange shape to her nose. So that's just something to be aware of. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you did, let me know. I'm going to do a few more tutorials going into the detail of certain modifiers, so if there's any specific ones that you're interested in, just let me know and I'll have a look. And if you've got any suggestions for any other tutorials, I'm more than happy to hear about them. If you enjoy these tutorials, please don't forget to click like and most importantly subscribe as well, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.